A victory it was, and yet a warning. And the princes took heed of it, and thereafter drew closer their leaguer, and strengthened and ordered their watch, setting the siege of Angband. Hey everyone, Yoiston here, and I hope you all are doing well, wherever you are in Middle-earth. Today we are exploring an interesting scenario. While not quite a theory, we are going to take a look at how the Elves could have defeated Morgoth during the First Age, without the intervention of the Valar or their people, without the actions of Eärendil and Elwing going west to plead for aid. While it would have been a slim chance, I do think it would be possible. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me today. Let's begin our tale. Let's start with the very premise of this video. Would it have even been possible for the Elves of Beleriand to have beaten Morgoth, most powerful of the Ainur and stronger individually than each one of the Valar? While it does definitely seem implausible, I would make the argument that, under the exact right circumstances and at the right time, yes, I do think the Elves could have beaten Morgoth. Now today we're going to explore how, but I do acknowledge that many things would have had to be different in the Legendarium for this to have occurred than what happened in the Legendarium, because Feanor's foresight upon his death, that the Thangorodrim and Morgoth's power both would not be overthrown by the Noldor, was indeed accurate, as were many of the signs pointing to the downfall of the Noldor. But note that Feanor does say Noldor, and only after all that had happened to him. If the Elves were to overthrow Morgoth during the First Age, they would have needed to have a more unified and less, in many ways, demonstrable exile from Valinor. The doom of the Noldor that hung over that people could not have been helpful in that regard, as it was said that all they sought to accomplish would come to ruin in the end. Therefore, one of the first changes here would have to be the aversion of the kinslaying at Alqualondë. Had that not happened, the doom of the Noldor would not have been pronounced, and furthermore, the hosts of Feanor and Fingolfin would have marched into Middle-earth together, and, likely, Finarfin would have also continued the march as well, as he and his folk only turned back after the kinslaying. So that is an important first step. I think the Noldor really doomed themselves right from the start with the kinslaying, as we will come back to when the Noldor meet with Thingol's folk in Beleriand. Had that evil been averted, and the fire in Feanor's heart at least put aside in that moment, his true goal of the overthrow of Morgoth would have been further realized. But beyond this, we have a few interesting things upon entering Middle-earth that make this inquiry all the more possible. There are a few times in the canon Silmarillion when Morgoth actually shows his weakness, his ability to be injured, or that his forces could be defeated. In the early battles of Beleriand, being the first battle between Morgoth's forces and the remaining Teleri elves, or the battle under stars, or even the Battle of the Lammoth, we see that, at best, Morgoth has only partial victories in the beginning, which turn against him with the full coming of Fingolfin's host, and the siege that would be placed upon Angband for hundreds of years. Even then, during the later Battle of Sudden Flame, Morgoth himself is depicted as one who can be wounded, even permanently scarred by the weapons of the Elves. Morgoth was not invincible against the Elves, far from it. If caught at the right time, the Elves certainly could have beat him. That right time would have had to have been at least within the first 200 to 300 years of the First Age. And here's why. Once Angband was pushed back into a siege, and there was a leaguer and defense set around Angband, the Elves became complacent, while the Dark Lord continued to hone his creatures and their evils. The dragons really only came about because of the amount of time that Morgoth had to sit and think and experiment to create Glaurung and the subsequent winged dragons after him. Sooner, generally speaking, would have been better a time to attack than later. And again, if we go back and say the Elves might have only defeated him without the first kinslaying, with the arrival of the Noldor in Middle-earth, perhaps Thingol might not have loved this overall, but he would have met and befriended many among the Noldor, the people of his friend Finwë. He would have not had a reason to reject them as he did in the canon because of the kinslaying. Together, the Elves, the Noldor of Feanor, Fingolfin, Finarfin, with the help of the Sindar of Doriath, the Green Elves, and the Dwarves of the Blue Mountains, they all could have manifested a plan together to see the downfall of Morgoth. Therefore, if within the first 100 years or so of being in Beleriand the Elves besieged Angband, set up their strongholds, and worked together, the Dwarves might have had the time to create siege weapons powerful enough to break into Angband, while the Elves perfected their weapon crafting for their host, and, even without the race of men in Beleriand at that time, the Elves could have led a pincer attack upon Angband that might have broken through the gates and led the most powerful of the elves to a fight with Morgoth in the dungeons of that keep. Surely there would have been many fatalities for the elves and dwarves here as well, as there were still the Balrogs to worry about, Sauron, and the rest. But in this way, had the elves and dwarves been more unified, had the first kinslaying never happened, and thus the doom of the Noldor came never to be laid upon them and the hosts of the elves traveled together, I must imagine that the early century or so of the First Age would have seen the end of Morgoth before the elves could have diminished too much, before Morgoth could have created the dragons, and so forth. Just as it is in many tragic stories, the biggest weakness between many of our heroes in the Silmarillion was their disunity over disputes of kin and Silmarils. But had those more petty fights between those peoples that should have been allies been put aside, I honestly doubt Morgoth would have stood much of a chance overall. Again, Fingolfin himself wounded the Dark Lord in single combat 7 times. What might have happened had Fingolfin, Feanor, Finarfin, Thingol, Galadriel, Turgon, and Finrod, and others, all been present in a fight against Morgoth themselves? Even with Morgoth's servants, I think that the elves would have prevailed, for the Noldor so easily might have been true allies of the Sindar, rather than the harbingers of pain and disunity that they were for them in so many instances during the First Age. And as time went on, it just seems that the elves in the canon took strategic positions to place their castles and strongholds, only to be wiped out from battle to battle one by one. But in this case, had Feanor not been so hasty, but the others would have been more so to attack Morgoth, I think the Dark Lord would have met his end. Now exactly what type of end that would have been is unknown to me. Whether or not Ainur could have even been really killed, or if their spirits would have lingered on, I'm not sure. But at the very least, they certainly could have captured and defeated Morgoth in battle, or killed his physical form, potentially. And there we have it, my friends. I think an early push against Morgoth would have been the way to go, but what do you all think? Let me know in the comments below. And so we come to the end of my thoughts on how the elves could have defeated Morgoth on their own without the Valar. From this tale, we see that our greatest strength always comes from unity. Thank you all so much for watching. I hope you all enjoyed this video. If you did, please be sure to hit that like button and share this with a friend. If you'd like to support the channel, please consider getting some candles from our friends Mythologie Candles, or order some Weta or United Cutlery, Lord of the Rings swords, statues, and other replicas from Castle Kon, who does international shipping, and use the code WEST at checkout, and please check out our merch and Patreon. Also, please check out Z-Wood and their wood-carved maps and clocks, and use the code in the description for 15% off at checkout. Thanks to our Valar tier patrons and YouTube members, Peter Shepard, John Hume, Reese Jenkins, Arthur Merlin, Theodore, Andrew Carlisle, and Zumi. Please subscribe and hit that bell button to join the Men of the West and all of the free peoples today. And I'll see you all again next week with a remake of my Gil-galad epic character history. My friends, thank you all so much for joining me in this adventure. Until the next one.